Brennan and welcome to my approach to black and grey tattooing. This is a tattoo tutorial that's aimed at professional tattoo artists. I've also included a tattoo setup and breakdown. Reason why I've included them is throughout my years of tattooing and being in the industry, I've worked all around Europe, all around UK and in America. And a couple of things I have noticed is a difference in standards in regards to setting up and breaking down. So I just thought I'd put that out there in case anyone needs a little refresher or to realise if they're doing something wrong. Throughout this video, this is my approach to tattooing. It's not the be all and end all of how it's done. Hope you can take some things away from it, and thank you very much, and hope you enjoy what you see.
Okay, so when you set it up, first thing we need to do is clean all of the areas that we were working with. There's different products out there you can distill. Basically what we're doing is we're disinfecting the area. So there's a big difference between sterilisation and disinfection. Okay, so once everywhere is cleaned and disinfected, next thing we're going to do is we're going to wet it again with our disinfectant. This time, when we wipe it down, we're going to leave it slightly wet. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to cover our surface areas with cling film. And this is a barrier to protect. So the reason why we are burying everything up, so that's essentially what I'm doing here. That's to stop any cross-contamination of blood-borne pathogens. And so anything that can't be sterilised, so can't go through an autoclave or a sterilisation process, that then needs to be barriers up. So disinfected first to make it a clean working area, and then what we're doing is we're barriering it up so that when we're done, we can then get rid of that, and anything that is any blood-borne pathogens on there and then not getting transferred from one area to another area, or more importantly, one client to another client. So basically, all your working areas, anything you're going to touch during the tattoo process that can't be sterilised or isn't disposable one-time use, needs to be barriers up. Okay, and that obviously includes your wash bottle. Okay, from here then, what I'm then going to do is clean on top of the cling film. Right, all your working areas, they need to be in like a triple system. So the first system being the actual hard, cleanable surface itself. Then we've put a waterproof barrier over the top of that. So in this case, cling film. And then the third layer of that is going to be some form of absorbent layer. So that's where your black cloths would come into play. But the idea of this is, imagine a bit of ink has come off the tattoo needle for some bodily fluids from the client. If that lands straight onto the cling film, it's very easy for that to then roll off and then transfer somewhere else. Where if we have an absorbent layer, we trap in that. Obviously, it's then protected with the barrier, in this case the cling film. And if it does go through, we've got a hard, workable surface area that's not absorbent, that can then be disinfected and wiped clean. Okay, so from here then, we're going to get out the supplies that we're going to need. 486 ink caps, doing a black grey piece. They've got the tongue depressor. Now I've got 2 rinse cups. From here, I lay out some petroleum jelly. Some people just use petroleum jelly. From here then I'm going to lay out some ointments. So what I'm doing is I'm securing the ink caps down using some of the petroleum jelly. That's just to stop them moving around, flipping over while I'm tattooing. Okay, next thing I'm going to do is with the 2 rinse cups, I'm going to give them a clean. This I'm just going to use a little bit of green soap. Any products that we're using, so for example green soap, or if we were using Distill for disinfecting our surface areas, everyone works in a 1:10 ratio. So if we imagine the distilled water being 10 parts, 9 parts of that would be the distilled water, and 1 part would be a concentrated distill or concentrated green soap. You can buy products that are pre-mixed, but if you're mixing it yourself, or if you were making your own disinfectant, it'd be 1 part bleach, 9 parts distilled water. Okay, so I've cleaned both the rinse cups. Okay, so all I'm going to do now is I'm going to cut one of the rinse cups in half. Half will then, the top half, turned upside down, is then going to become the base. And that's just to make sure that the rinse cup is less likely to be knocked over if this was to get nudged. The top half then I'm then going to use to cover up my ointments. Okay, this is called barrier tape. So where I've laid out my ink caps, I'm going to put a piece of barrier tape over the top of that. Now with rinse cup, I'm going to fill it up with distilled or sterile water. Okay, and then so filled up with distilled water. I don't fill it all the way to the top, looking just over 3/4 full. And then I'll cover over the top of that with some more barrier tape. Okay, next thing I need to barrier it up is my power supply. So I just use barrier tape. Some people can use cling film, depending on what type of power supply you've got. Just working off that rule, whatever we touch that's not disposable or can't be sterilised needs to be barriered up. Next thing then is our machine. Okay, so depending on what type of machine you've got is dependent on how you are going to wrap up your machine and your clip cords / RCA cords. For me, I've got a tattoo pen. The most important bit is the grip that you use. So if that is a metal one, then that needs to be sterilised and go through a full sterilisation process, or use a one-time disposable. So I've got my tattoo grip ready. All I'm then going to do is I'm going to barrier it up and the RCA cords with a clip cords cover. So notice there I haven't brought it all the way to the ends. The back end of the machine, and then I'm going to connect with the RCA, and I'm going to pull the clip cords 3/4 of the way over my machine, like so. The very top bit, where my grip is going to go where it screws on, I'll connect that over and then pinch the ends of the clip cords, pull it round so it's tight, place my grip over the top and screw that into place. So now when we look, I've got one-time disposable sterile tattoo grip, then my tattoo machine is covered, and my RCA / clip cords, the go to prints. From here then, what I like to do is to secure over this with some grip tape, but I do it in 2 separate parts because my grip is adjustable, which it can help me adjust the throw of my needles. This also aids in, after a little bit of wear and tear, if someone's got an RCA cord that they've had for a while, that starts to come loose and that can be irritating when you tattoo. So this will also help secure that in place. From there then, that is essentially good to go. What I like to do is, I like to make my grip a little bit fatter, and that's just prevention. I believe is better than cure. So things like carpet all, I do a lot of detail work, so therefore I like quite a fat grip, which stops me holding the grip too tight. Then I just plug this into a power supply, and there we're good to go. Hoist it out there with the tattoo machine. If we're still working on that triple layered system, we've got what's not disposable is barriers up and still in that triple system, so the piece itself can be disinfected. It's then wrapped in a waterproof layer, and then it's got an absorber layer over the top. Okay, so to make this into a stencil, first of all the individual layers that I've used to create the piece of art, I'm going to condense them all down into one single layer, not including the background. With this layer then, I'm going to duplicate it. Once that's duplicated, I make sure it's got nice good contrast on it, and then I'm going to go up to the top here to where it says filter. Click on filter gallery, and then what I want to look for is under sketch, I want photocopy, and that'll give me this option. So from here now, I can adjust how much detail I want in it, and also the darkness of how I want it. My preferred method for making the stencil, I have the darkness all the way up, and I play around with the detail, slowly creeping it up to where it's readable for me. Now remember, with any stencil, this is your map on how you can then create it and make it into a tattoo. So you pick as much as of what you need. Once I've got that to a good place then, I can refer back to it by clicking on the eye icon where it says photocopy there, and I can also do that back and forth pretty quick and look at like a set piece and see, okay, can I read this bit here? And once you're happy, click OK. Now I've got a layer with my stencil and a layer with my reference. You print your reference out to the right size. You know that your stencil, when you print that out, it's going to be the same size. Okay, so this tattoo, I use a drop system. So got Empire Inks Ivory Black. What I'll do is 5 drops, and 10 drops, and 15. And from there, I'll do 50%. Then I'll do 3/4 and do 4. And with some clear distilled water, and then fill one with 5 drops, 10 drops, 50 drops, halfway, and 3/4. That way then, I've got my dark tone, my darkest value, all the way to my lightest value. Some people prefer to use less, some people use more. but that's the system that I use. I find I get very good gradients, and with a step that helps go from a light to dark, find it easy to work. Okay, so the different needles that I use, but my generic setup to do most of my pieces is I will have 5 round liner, and that'll be standard gauge. Then I use a 9 round shader, that's also standard gauge, 12. Then my magnums will be bulk pins, and I use curved. So I've got 9, 17, and a vary between a 21 or a 27. So here I'm prepping the skin. So first of all, I'll give it a good shave. We don't want any hairs. From there then, using some rubbing alcohol, giving it a good clean. You see there I'm eyeing up where the stencil's going to go. Usually with this, you want that client stood up or in the position. I find on this part of the leg, it didn't make no difference with the angle. So then I've put on some stencil solution. Put that on, get it nice and tacky. We don't want that too wet, otherwise the stencil's going to smudge. And likewise, we don't want it too dry where it doesn't stick. See, I've placed the stencil on. Make sure it's secured down firmly, and then slowly peel that back and reveal our stencil. Okay, what I'm doing here is I'm giving it a quick pat dry. So that's just going to help it dry quicker. Here what I'm doing then is with a sharp pen, start with like a light colour. And I'm just getting a basic shape and flow, connecting any bits with the other tattoos that are around it, so that it all flows into one piece. Things that I'm looking for here is like figure of 8s, S's, thinking about the golden ratio, 2/3 rule, all them bits, basic art that really help the tattoo flow. Generally when I'm thinking of these, what I'm looking at is highlights on the design that can flow. They can also aid with bringing backgrounds into the foreground, so that it's not just a simple plain background, but so it exaggerates the body parts and gives it a good flow and momentum throughout the tattoo. Moments here, but still with using the light pen, I was just playing around with the side of the gap, seeing how I'm going to connect it for future. From here then, I'll go to a darker colour pen and start picking out some of the lines that I actually wanted from the guidelines of the lighter pen. Still being quite rough when I'm using the pen, as in quite loose with it. It's just a guide. Still remember to have fun while we're doing the tattoo. So just enjoy it. Remember that it is art, and it's your art and the client's. So once I'm happy with what I've done, sometimes I like to just give a little smudge on set areas that either I don't want to tattoo from the stencil, or I want to drag off and it to form part of the background. Okay, so here now we're good to tattoo. So what I'm doing here is I've went straight in with a liner, and I'm starting to build on some of the textures. Conventionally, we would outline a tattoo, then do our solids, blacks, then do all our shading. What I like to do is build on the textures and solid black areas first, and then from there, I'll add the shading, using them textures as a guide on where I'm going. Reason why I'd use a liner, and I'll switch between a liner and a round shader depending on the textures or how fine I need them to be. The reason why I use them and not the edge of the Magnum on something that's in the foreground here is because I want it to be a lot sharper and crisper. And then when we shade over it and do some black on blacks, there's going to be a difference with using the liner compared to, say, a round shader or using the edge of the Magnum. It's going to be more sharper, and it'll allow me to shade over it with solid black, and then it still stands up and still holds. I was having a good chat there with the clients, don't know what I was talking about. So things that I'm doing here is where I've put them guidelines, whether that be for skin breaks or for the flow with the Sharpie pen. When I approach one of them, I'm just assessing and checking with the reference whether I'm going in front or behind of the subject that I'm tattooing. So as you can see there on the pumpkins, where the pen goes behind some, but it also goes in front. And I'm just picking that as I go along. So from here then I've switched to a Magnum, and initially I was just guiding in areas, and then now I'm just putting in solid blacks and building up the shape slowly. Point to note here, when I'm dipping from different tones, it's important that we safeguard the black. So what I mean by that is when I'm dipping in between values, if I went from the solid black and then I want to go into a lighter tone for a moment, so like a mid-tone or a light tone grey wash, then obviously I'm going to clean off the needle, make sure it's dry, and then dip into there. But when I'm saying safeguarding my black, at any point that I'm going to go back into the solid black, it's important then that I make sure the needle is cleaned and dry before I go into the black. Otherwise it'll dilute that black and it won't be, obviously after a 5-6 hour appointment of a tattoo, it's not going to be solid black anymore. Okay, so what you can see me doing here then is using a lighter grey wash. I'm exaggerating the textures and also building up the shapes that I want and the values that I want. Always making care to keep an eye on your reference, see where your light sources are, and you kind of like safeguarding your light sources, building on your textures, and just building it up as we go. So here's a good example where I'm just quickly guiding in areas that I want with the Magnum, so it's nice and soft, and we can then decide later if we want that sharper or softer. Okay, when I start my tattoos, I generally start in the bottom right corner, and that's so that as I'm wiping into my tattooed area, not into my stencil or my pen. When you're working with Sharpies or pens to exaggerate your backgrounds and bring them into the foreground, quite a common mistake that people do is they'll line them in. What I like to do is I'll use a Magnum, shade that in quite softly so it's got a soft contrast, and then from that I can then decide later on if I want that sharper or softer.
So just double checking on my reference, making sure I'm following, getting the right tones, right values. Here I'm guiding in the chin line, and you can see the motion I'm doing, that back and forward motion, making sure to get no needle lines. And from there you see me go to a more circular motion, and that's to like blend out and also to aid getting it a bit more darker. I know that area there is quite a solid value. Important when we're doing black and grey that we still saturate our tones, so it's going to hold up over time, and we want them mid-tones to stand up, and that lays with our lighter tones and our skin breaks and all them parts actually looking how they should. So here I'm thinking about the, as you can see, we've slowed it down so you can see the actual pace of the strokes of the needle. You can see it's quite a slow stroke that allows us to get less needle marks and to give a nice smoother blend. You also notice that I do a little bit of cross hatching, but I'm also thinking about where it goes from dark to light. So the direction, the way I'm holding the machine, and the way that I'm doing a pushing motion and a backwards dragging motion. Always keeping a constant eye on your reference. And it's good to obviously look at the whole picture as a whole, but when we're working on one small part, really focus in on that part. Make sure you're getting the values right, safeguarding any highlights that need to be in there, or any flow or backgrounds or pen marks that you've put in there, why you put them in there in the first place. Should probably sort them grey hairs out. That's a lot of vocal clients, give me them. Only joking, it's probably the kids. Okay, so all I'm doing is I'm just working my way along. I'm blocking in my main values. What you see in here is where I've marked in the values, and then over that with a mid to light tone, and then blending over them values just to get the blends right, almost like glazing with paintings. So I'm glazing over it, aiding with the saturation, but also getting the values right and just slowly building it. Now, I run my machines quite low, so here for a big Magnum I'll probably run at 8 volts maximum. When I switch to a small Magnum or a liner or round shader, I'm lowering that down to about 7.5 volts. So not much trauma is happening to the skin. Nice and slow, nice and gentle. Making sure I've got a good technique of a good stretch. Letting the needle do the work rather than trying to force it in. That allows me to then build up the piece, making sure I am getting them values right. Common mistake that a lot of black and grey tattoo artists do is they're scared to put them solid blacks in and them dark mid-tones. But it really aids in building the piece. It gives it depth and brings the piece to alive. So as you've seen there, that was a good example of like glazing over the textures. So put the textures in first, build that up, and then slowly start adding my darker values, my shading, and building the piece up. This is why it's important that we practice art and not just there as a photocopier, so that we can see it, we can see the reference, we know what we want to achieve, and slowly we can start adjusting it and making it that way. Thinking about the light source, the direction of the light, how that's going to affect. Okay, so this bit is like the edge of the hair on the woman's face, but it's important that we understand contrast. So contrast is not just with our values of dark and light. We also need contrast between what's in focus and out of focus. So I switched to like a smaller magnum, and I'm just shading that in because I don't want it too crisp. That hair that I was doing in the background, we want that pushback. What I'm doing here then is I'm sharpening that skin break that I want over the woman's neck, but you can also see that I'm glazing over it with a lighter tone. And that's because I'm thinking about what's in front, what's behind. So as you can see that skin break comes behind the pumpkins, so therefore it wouldn't be as bright as the one that was in front. So the one that's in front I'm going to sharpen up, and the one that's behind I'm going to soften up by doing like a light glaze over the top of it. And all them little bits, as you keep building them up, that just keeps adding to the overall look of the tattoo, but it also gives it depth. Now, if you spend the same amount of time as you do on your foregrounds and your reference piece as you do your backgrounds, that's what will really bring the piece to life. So now I'll move on to the face. Firstly, I'm safeguarding any of them areas. I'm starting with my darker tones, building them in, keeping a close eye on the reference, where they're going. When I'm switching from like a bigger magnum to a smaller magnum, basically what I'm thinking of is like a paintbrush. So the area size that I want to cover, and also if I want it smooth or I want it more textured, you're going to find it easier to cover a bigger area and get it smoother and nice and soft using a bigger magnum. So just slowly building it up, starting with my darker tones, and then connecting them, blending them in together. And safeguarding where the highlights are. So we can see around the very edge of the chin line. It's got like an underglow to it. Now, if it's not white, we'll safeguard it first, then as you see, we'll then glaze over it with a lighter tone, and then just get that right out as it is via the stencil. But safeguarding it first allows me to move on and make it a nice soft transition from tone to tone. Okay, so from here now, I'll move on to the lips. This is a really good example of doing the textures and the solid blacks first. So I'm starting with my dark tones. Now, if I want these textures to be nice and soft, and then decide afterwards which I want to sharpen up, that's where I'm going to use the edge of the magnum. So that's going to give a softer approach than it would using a liner or a round shader. So I'm just building up them tones, seeing which values are dark, and then building the shape up with the textures and the darks first. And then from there, I'll use them as my reference points and guides to then add the mid tones and the lighter tones in. As you can see there, the direction of the needle. So the top of the bottom lip there is obviously going to have a shadow on it. So we're thinking of where that shadow is going to be and where it's going to go from light to dark. So I find that the push of the needle will give a more darker value, whereas a backstroke will give a lighter value. And that's why I've got the needle pushed that way. And then just slowly building that up, adding them into the textures. Just keeping a constant eye and checking on your reference. Make sure you are safeguarding where the highlighted areas are. And you just keep going, slowly building until the tones and values are right. And you see there, light glazing over them lighter areas because they're not fully skin tone. And there, using the edge of the Magnum and just enhancing some of the textures of the lip and pulling it from the darker areas over the skin breaks into our highlights and back into our darker areas. Okay, from here then you can see I've switched to a round shader. And from this I can then just sharpen up areas. Them areas are solid black, I can get them super clean, super crisp. Without just using the edge of the Magnum, and I can carry on building, sharpening up them areas and getting them solid blacks in. Okay, as well as crisping up the top of the bottom lip there, and I'm also getting in the solid black areas and blocking in the shape of the teeth. From there then, the top lip, thinking of and looking at the reference, you can see where your darker areas are, where it's solid black. This is why it's also important to try and draw regularly and study art. And you can see where them areas, the most darkest areas are. Being aware and checking your reference so that if it starts fading out from solid black and going into a more darker mid-tone, that we do clean off. And then what I'll do is, still using a round shader, I'll give it a good clean like I just did, go to a mid-tone and start building on it from there. Okay, still using the round shader then. What I'm doing now is I've cleaned off the needle, I went to a more diluted, and then slowly build them teeth. Now I'm back to a 9 Magnum. Thinking of the values, the shading over the teeth. We don't want them just palely white, looking like turkey teeth. So we're looking at a reference, seeing how they look, where the values, where the shapes are, and then tattoo it. So as we do this top lip, important then that we look at where our values are. If we start seeing some shading that's next to it, that's aiding building that up, then we'll use that, whether that be the top lip. Looking where the highlights are. As we move on to the nose now, we'll see the same thing. So we're blocking in our shapes, looking at the values, and then we just then start enhancing them from there and then building the piece up. So now I've switched to a bigger magnum and we're blocking in the nose and thinking of that top lip area. And same again, I'm starting with my darks and then slowly building it up and pushing them down from the dark tones into my mid-tones, into my lighter tones, and safeguarding highlighted areas. And then from there, you can then decide if we need to glaze over some of them lighter areas and lighter values, push them back slightly because they stand out too much. It's important that we start with our darker values as we do that technique, because we can always safeguard them areas and then decide to push them back where it'll be harder to lighten them up. So we start with the darker values first, and that transitions from that dark value we can get into our lighter values. So just edging in the side of the face there so we don't lose any stencil, and leading up into some little textures. So occasionally with that, if I want them really soft, I might just use the edge of the magnum sometimes for some smaller parts, so just by tilting the magnum, just to aid in speed. Only do that if it's in like a loose area, so an area that's maybe out of focus. I just want nice and soft. It's not like a key element, like an eye or nose or lips or main feature. So we're going to switch back to a round shader, and that's to sharpen some areas up. So I went straight in with solid black. And sometimes I'll do that with a mid-tone if I don't want it too sharp or too dark, but I still want the area to be nice and crisp and clean. This also aids the tattoo to hold up over time. So by doing that with the round shader, it allows us to give a nice, clean looking, crisp tattoo. It also aids with the depth. Really paying attention to the shape and the folds of the nostrils there. So as you notice with the round shader, I only did it on the top part where that would then tuck underneath behind. I didn't do it on the bottom part. Okay, so from here now on this edge, what I've done is I've cleaned off the round shader and I've went to a lighter tone. So kind of looking second tone up for them edges. And like I was talking about, I still want it sharp, but I don't want a solid black line. So I'm using that round shader and just slowly building it up. It's important on like side of noses, especially if there's not a really stark contrast between the dark and the lights, that we do that. And that's how it holds up over time. Remember early on in my career, I'd do a piece, I'd do it all just with the Magnum, and then it'd look fine a year later. You'd see it on returning clients 3-4 years later, and it just wouldn't hold up as strong. That's why I found it's important we use round shaders as well, and also liners. But we can still do that without having a solid outline around everything and losing that realism. So from here there, just carrying on, focused on the nose, safeguarding that main highlight, and just slowly building up the areas to it. So I've safeguarded that highlight, and then now just slowly building up the values, thinking of the shapes, how they curve around, where they come from. Also when we're following a convex objects, you know, like a nose or the side of the nostrils, if we really think about how they bend, how they curve around, and we do that with the approach how we build up from our darks and mid-tones to our lighter tones, and then eventually obviously to leaving our highlighted skin breaks, that will give you a more realistic look, because you're going to push it from them darker areas out and following the shapes that you need to be doing. Okay, so here I'm blocking in a negative. I'm thinking about them highlight areas and also the little textures that come off them. Don't want them too sharp at first, that's why I'm still using a small magnum for it. And then we can decide later on if we want any of them textures sharpening up, then we can always come back with a round shader or the line. So you see there, I blocked in roughly where I wanted them textures with the smaller magnum, and then now what I'm doing is I'm going over with bigger magnum, safeguarding the main areas I want to keep highlights, pushing some areas back, and just adjusting slowly before I move on, pushing any areas back that I think are too light, keeping a close eye on my reference, and just slowly building the tattoo. There's no rush. If we don't get it in one, you can always reapply a stencil. As you can see here, as I've moved up the tattoo, I then started looking and realising that a couple of little bits need to be a little bit more darker values. So, as said earlier, not much trauma was caused in the skin. Good technique rather than just trying to hammer it in. And that allows me to work over the skin quite a few times. So here then, I'm starting some edges of the hair, switch to a liner, put them in. Now, when I put them in, I didn't just quickly solid line it, slowly build it, thinking about having like a good flick off the end of the liner, and thinking about the direction of the hair and where it goes from solid to light. Just put a little bit of numbing foam on there to help clients. And just let that soak in as I work further up on the tattoo. It's important we make the clients as comfortable as we can while we're tattooing. It just allows us to work longer, allows us to not feel pressured to rush or to get the piece finished. And the client's going to end up with a better tattoo at the end of it. And that's what it's all about, is you've done the best you can do and you've enjoyed the process of creating your own art. And also the clients walk away super happy with the new tattoo. And the comfier it can be for the clients, the 100% the easier it'll be for you as an artist. Just making sure you're keeping your area clean, keeping ointments, keep topping ointments up as you go. So on here then, I'm just carrying on building around the face, working my way up from the bottom right as I go. Safeguarding highlighted areas. And just thinking about the shape, the flow, using the pen lines as a guide that are, they're there to assist me of the direction and flow of how I want to pull things around. When I get to like the edges of my tattoos, generally because I'm working on bigger projects, obviously yes, I want them to look finished as a set piece. but at the same time, I'm quite loose with the edges. And the reason for that is so that I can always add to the tattoo. And I'm not going to like snooker myself or take up a bit of real estate on that body part. So here I'm switching back to a liner and just building up them textures of the hair, thinking about and keeping a close eye on where the hair goes in front of any skin breaks and negatives, or I've morphed that into the dress of the gypsy, which then I've used into like a skin break or the flow leading into the face of the woman. So it's kind of like I'm tattooing backwards. I'm building up the textures of my dark values behind. We can see here with the eye, I'm guiding in them areas, putting in any areas that are solid black or mid-tones, using a round shader and switching between the round shader and the liner, so I can get a nice sharp contrast on the areas I want sharp, and obviously softer where they need to be. So generally like the bottom eye we want a bit softer usually, top of the eyelids we want a bit sharper. But that all depends on your reference, so keep a close eye on your reference on how it is, because that's going to change if the light's come from the top or the bottom, where the light source is. Okay, so now still using the round shader on some of them hair strands that the follow through. You can then use that to start building on some of them lines as we were coming off. So we get like a nice transition from a thicker line into a thinner line. And just carry on, building off the eyelashes. Keep an eye on the reference, whether they're dark or they're sharp or soft. From here then switch to a 9 Magnum, and now just start putting in the values onto the eyes. Thinking again, just like we did with the nose when we're doing the eyelids and the shape of the eyes and the folds, really thinking about them and concentrating on them as we're putting the values in. So we're understanding what the actual set subject is with tattoo and what body part we're doing, and thinking about how it folds on a face, where the eyelid will fold in the corners. And then that will help us understand why that area is dark, why it is solid black. So now we're getting into a part where the woman's face is starting to morph with parts of the gypsy wagon. Also where that mixes, so as that morphs in, you're going to have elements of 2 or 3 different references as you're coming in. When I get to parts of that, I just look at my reference and really study what it is, and I think of shapes, values, and just trust my reference, don't overthink it. So from here then, same process where I'm kind of building up the background first and bringing them, safeguard the negatives, bringing that out, and just slowly building on the tattoo. If you see any areas of solid black, you can get them in. That'll help trap it in, it'll help aid. In case you start losing your stencil, you've got them main block shapes put in. And it gives you points to work from. So we're there moving on to the stairs, really thinking about like where the wheel of the wagon, the one that's behind, but you can see it through the stairs, seeing how that transitions through. So blocking in our solid colours, solid tones, to block in them shapes. And then later on we can then glaze over and push them areas back so they are in the background. So when I do these, I'm thinking about what I want sharp and don't, so I'm generally switching between a 5 round liner or a 9 round shader. And just making sure them areas are in there, paying attention to the textures, whether they are black or they're mid-tones. So as you can see here on the wagon, I've cleaned off the round shader. I'm going in with a lighter tone and I'm just slowly building up, paying close attention to the values of them textures. And by mapping in all them textures, it aids me to see where I need the values of shading on top of them. So here I've come back onto some of the textures that I want coming away from the face, where I've overlaid the moon on the woman's face, and I wanted the like clouds drifting off. It's important when you're doing your tattoos that you have fun with it. So if I start seeing any of these textures that, you know, they lead into something cool, they transition into smoke that was on another side, for example, or a part of the other piece, they start transitioning them textures in. So now I've come in with a liner, and same again with the liner. I'm not using straight black, I'm using like a light to mid-tone, and I'm just building on them textures, just slowly building them. You know, I'll probably be using one of my lightest values, maybe my second lightest value to do this with the liner. You know, so it'll hold up. It's not blood lined in, but at the same time, it's not going to be crisp black. But it'll allow me to build them textures, not that much trauma to the skin. And if I need to switch to a solid, more darker value, then I will. So like as you can see on here, I've switched to looks like a mid-tone and push that in. And then remembering to safeguard, clean off the needle, and then add that in. A couple of bits there that, you know, hadn't come on with the stencil, but I could see the textures, so just enjoy it, put them in, have fun creating the piece. So using like a combination of different techniques here with the liner. So I'll shade with the liner. I'll also use it to line. And then also because I'm using so the reason why I prefer a 5 round liner, I used to use a 3, but the 5 round liner allow me to shade a lot more softer. But at the same time with the 5, I can use long tapers, so I can still get a nice thin crisp line. So a little bit more number foam. We have had breaks throughout this. I think we probably had about 3-4 breaks, and we stopped for about 20-30 minutes for lunch. So just coming back in with the liner, slowly building on my textures. Switch these to a round shader and start blocking in the textures leading up to the woman's dress. And just adding them values in as I go. So here's a good example where I've really cleaned off the round shader, using a real light value. Just really studying the reference, looking at what the stencil marks are, remembering that the stencil, it's your own map. if it didn't transition as the stencil or it's wiped off, you know, having that ability to look at it, follow your reference. And just taking your time. Now with the round shader, I've went probably up to my third lightest, so I'm into like my mid-range now, like 15 drops to 50%, and from here then I'm using the round shader and just adding value and depth to the door of the cart or the gypsy wagon, and using that round shader to shade them areas in. So paying close attention, thinking about where the darkest areas are, where the lightest areas. There's a couple of candles on the wagon, so we've got to safeguard them, thinking about the glow that comes off the light. Now I'm just back working on the dress. We start with her arm there. Yeah, so I think here I was using a 5 round liner, so you can see how I can shade with it, but also I can put them textures in. If I want a line to sharpen an area up, I can put that in. Okay, so now I've switched. Now that I've got all them textures locked in, I've switched to a small magnum, and now I'm just adding and building to the values. Just taking my time, paying close attention to the reference. So some of them areas that I would have shaded with the round shader and the liner, just strengthen them up. That's aiding in like the saturation. It's pushing it into the correct areas. And it's just adding values and depth to the piece. Important thing to note as well is that you can't see it in the video, but I'm paying close attention to actually what values I need. I'm using the right values for what I can see. So just constantly cleaning off your needle, changing the value to what you need. Okay, so just same again here. Them areas that I did with the liner and textured in, I'll just strengthen some bits up at the edge of the magnum. I'll also build off some of them lines and shade off the lines and give them like a softer, realistic look. But that allows it to hold up over time and still be strong as a tattoo. Okay, so we'll come back to the stairs here. So I'm putting in like my solid areas of black. And then thinking about when I'm going to glaze over them pieces, which bits I'm going to push back. Okay, so now I've come back in with my liner there, and what I was doing was adding some solid black lines to where I felt like they needed to be stronger. So here, as I was talking about, pushing some of them areas back, glazing over. You can spend all that time safeguarding them highlight areas, and then, you know, you then just shade straight over them. But that's part of the process. That's how you make something in the background still be crisp and sharp, but then pushing it out of focus, thinking about what we want to the foregrounds and the backgrounds the whole way through. So here then, I'm just putting in my solid blacks. My solid blacks and my mid-tones, and transitioning them off. At the same time as I'm doing this, I'm thinking about the hair textures. Now I'm using the edge of the Magnum when I know that I want them softer and I want them to transition from the values of the dress. So where them parts morph over, I'm just really thinking about where I want them to come from, whether I want them fake into thin. And we're also, you know, thinking about the different techniques we use throughout tattooing. So tattooing itself, I've always seen it as like a problem solving thing. So say maybe you've got 10 different techniques you can do with a tattoo needle and a tattoo machine. And then when you're looking at your reference and you're looking at what that texture or that image is, it's the then puzzle finding part is what combination of techniques are you going to use to create that? What needle is going to give you the best results? Is it going to be using the edge of the Magnum to get it softer, or using a liner because you want it more sharper and crisp? And then it just slowly builds on it, linking that in with other parts of tattoos. We've got them solid blacks, and if them areas of left skin tone, if they're not skin tone in the reference, we slowly start pushing them back. Also important to note that, like, as you're tattooing, and then when you look back at a certain area, if you notice, oh, that bit needs darkening, that bit needs bringing out or sharpening up, or that bit needs to be softer, we're just constantly adjusting as we go. And like, them bits become more apparent as we do the next stage of the tattooing. As we push up, we see how it looks in relationship to the part that you've just done. And then we just slowly adjust it. And that's why it's important to correct technique and making the client comfortable, which will allow us to, you know, give quite a few passes over a set area without causing too much trauma to the skin. It allows us to build on the tattoo as a whole. So you know, with the round shader, I'm just building in some of them textures. on the woman's clothes. Similar technique to how I did it with the wagon and the pumpkins. So putting in them textures first, thinking about what actual value they are, whether they're dark or not, dark or light, and then just build it up, textures first, shade over them, and then just slowly build a piece. So here I'm moving on to the hair. So basically I'm just shading with the round shader, so I can get like nice strands. With this, I like put in my main areas, darker value, and then switch to like my lighter values that are more soft, and get like a nice soft blend and transition from the hairs. So, you know, switch to a liner, thinking about the woman's face. Obviously it's small, so I need to put in some lines to make this hold up and make it strong. As you can see, but I've not went in with straight black. I've you know, around the woman's face there. Went in with like a mid to light tone. Now I'm just adding some more little details and textures that I've seen around the windows of the doors. I just noticed on the reference, so we'll just put them in there. And then just carry back on with, or like push and pull of parts on the tattoo. So you can see another one of the negatives that I wanted a bit more back, just glazed over, and then just studying the tattoo as a whole. Like that area is too bright, it should actually be more into the backgrounds. So the majority of the piece is like mapped out already now, so now I can go in with a bigger magnum and just start blocking in them main shapes and thinking about, you know, what is solid black and what transitions to like a really dark mid-tone to obviously your light tones and your negatives. Same time here, I'm being quite loose and playing with the what's come from like the foreground, which is transitioning into the backgrounds. Now I want that like into, you know, like a smoky, misty effect. Yeah, so I'm just being loose with my backgrounds and enjoying it and having fun with it. So I'm just thinking about the shapes that I want, how I'm going to connect it in, and linking them in with the remainder of Kirsty's leg tattoo. And generally when I'm doing them, I just kind of block them in, and then I'll always come back, sharpen up, and then look at the piece as a whole with the backgrounds. It's the same again, that same process. I've put all my lines and textures and got them areas in, and then now I'm coming back in with my shader, putting in my values. So here I'm like concentrating of transitioning from like a solid black to more of a mid-tone. I'm just making sure that my mid-tones and all my light tones are still well saturated into the background. And I'm just framing round the gypsy woman that's stood by a wagon. Being conscious of where the highlights are from her hair and her face. And then just shading over, transitioning from my dark values into the mid-tones. So here now I'm doing the sky. So on the sky I wanted like some star effects, some stars in there, but I don't want them to be like solid white highlighters. So using the Magnum, I've went in with a slightly lighter tone than what I'm gonna do the sky, and I'm just leaving negatives and more circular motion, using the edge of the Magnum every now and then, just to leave a few negative spots. And I'll come back to them bits and sharpen and crisp them up in a bit. So same again with the edges of the tattoo. I'm kind of like transitioning them off, fading them off, not making it too solid, not making it too firm or too dark. And I can't overlay some more backgrounds or transition that in with solid black at a later stage. And just still thinking of the shape, thinking how it might connect into another piece, and leaving like options open for future pieces. So now I was just going back in, using the edge of the Magnum, strengthen some of them hair strands as we like glaze over and push some areas back. And then doing the same with the hair, adding value and depth to it. It's an important bit when we're doing like working on clothes like this, where I put all them textures in. It's pretty much the recurring theme. It's just safeguarding them highlighted areas, knowing where they are, when it goes from mid-tone to light tone, and then just work at one tone at a time. And think about like your different techniques of what you can use for softer and just blocking your areas in, remembering to keep a close eye on your reference and what you're doing and where them highlighted areas are. And also thinking about your, almost like your different size paintbrushes. You see I've switched from the bigger Magnum to the smaller Magnum, so I can get in them smaller gaps and build off them textures into the values of what they are. And not being afraid to put them solid black areas in, because that's what's going to hold your tattoo. As you can see here with the smaller Magnum, going again in that like circular, quite loose motion to leave some of them negatives. And then I'll just look at some of them and adjust some of them, and if I don't like one, I'll just shade over it. And then just slowly build that up. I mean, I'm quite a bit of fun playing around with that little technique. I think I've seen Paul Booth use it first to do like skin textures. He done it with like a round shader. So here I'm carrying on with that background of just playing with it, thinking about the general shape. So I went in first with a round shader. So this I'll do the opposite, where I'm doing the basic rough shapes first with a bigger Magnum, and just blocking in some of them shapes, switching sometimes to the edge of the Magnum to put in some small little textures and tones, but just having fun with it. Don't want it to be overpowering or too strong. And then just thinking about the shapes that come off and starting to like connect it in with the other tattoo. As you can see here, I've got like a lighter tone, and I'm glazing and pushing areas back I'm like pushing them into which areas I actually want as highlighted and which bits I don't. So now I've come in with the round shader, and then some of them textures that I wanted stronger that I was doing with the edge of the Magnum, I'm just cherry picking which ones I want and which ones I don't. And then now come back in with the big Magnum and push certain areas back, leaving certain strands of them negative spaces. That'll give like a real nice soft effect, but it'll also give you loads of cool shapes. Thinking of like S's and figure of eights as I'm going through. And also with the backgrounds, I keep a close eye on areas that are, you know, is that highlight of the background taken away from the main reference points, the main points throughout the tattoo you want people to stare at and look at. So here I'm just strengthening up her face, giving her a good inspection, and then was like, actually her face was too bright. It didn't contrast good well against the hair. So another study of the reference and just push some bits back and thinking same again, even though the face is small, I'm thinking about where them tones come from a jawline, etc. Okay, so we're almost close to white time now, so giving us some back team. She's starting to feel it now. It's been a long day. Wrapping her up with some cling film, some back team. During this process, so here we are, we're about to start the whites. Usually before I do this, I'll take a photograph of the tattoo and have a good study of it while she's having a break, letting that back team sink in. That lets me have a good look at where I want them highlights. I don't want to go over the top with the whites. We want to just really think about where the actual white areas are, not just where we want skin areas. And less can definitely be more. So put some on the candles, thought about the highlighted areas on the lips, the eyes, them areas we want to be wet or like really bright. And then just a few little bits onto the carriage that we wanted to highlight. But this client's from Scotland, so her skin's really white, so it works really well. Give the tattoo a clean. I let it rest for a few minutes. Cleaned it off, and then now photography time. So, getting some photographs. I'll get some of the clients sat down, some of them stood up, a few different positions. Probably take about 50 photographs just to see which ones are the best ones. Do some videos of them, different angles as well. So here you can see me using just using my iPhone, but I've got ND filter and ND filter paper on a light as well, and that really helps with the glare and gets good photographs. So clean the tattoo off, and now I'm just wrapping the tattoo up. Yeah, so some people obviously prefer to just use ointments and cling film. I prefer using like second skin, like Yayo Guard, Dermalize. There's plenty of different products out there to use. Make sure the whole tattoo is covered with Dermalize and it's going to hold. I prefer to cut it into smaller strips. That allows me to place it on, make sure it's bending good round the body, and that's that. And there's the finished tattoo. I think you can see. Hope you all enjoyed it. Thanks very much. So when we take gloves off and we've wiped it down,
With our dirty hands, we will scrumple up the kitchen roll we use. Then what we'll do is pinch in the back of the glove. We turn that glove inside out. And then scrumple that up into this glove. And then with 2 fingers, we push it underneath the glove so we're holding the inside. And then we pull it inside out on itself. And that's how we remove gloves. I think to break it down there is that you have clean hands and dirty hands. So what I'm going to do is pick up the wash bottle, holding with the dirty hands, and a part of it's not barriers, I'll hold with the clean hands, and then remove. That way, nothing that was contaminated is going back onto stuff that can't be sterilised and that can only be disinfected. So I'm going to work my way round my station, everything I barriers up, and now we're going to break down. When it comes to needles, they're going to go into the sharp spoon, rinse cup, and that's going to go into the dirty sink. When we're breaking down our machine, at any stage, if we need to touch 2 parts, so therefore we've no longer got clean hands, what I do is I'll loosen the grip, place it just over so it's on loose, and at this stage, change gloves. Now when I pick this up, dirty hands, I can push off the ends, and then I've got a clean bit I can hold, clean hands, and then continue that process of dirty hands, clean hands. Similar to the way we take out a pair of gloves, with the clean hand we can hold when something's been turned inside out, and then grab it with that hand. So once everywhere is stripped of all the barrier, change your gloves. Then we're going to disinfect all the equipment and our serve facilities. When we disinfect our areas, each individual one, I'm going to use a clean bit of kitchen towel, kitchen paper, and then we're also going to change the gloves after each one. Once everywhere is wiped down, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it all a quick disinfectant again. This time, when I wipe it, I'm going to leave it slightly damp. That's how you break it up.